In our world, the Soviet Union died on Christmas Day, 1991. Mikhail Gorbachev announced the dissolution. The red flag came down. 15 republics became 15 countries overnight. And the chaos that followed, the looting of state assets, the collapse of life expectancy, the rise of the oligarchs, the wars in Chechnya, the expansion of NATO to Russia's border, the slow hardening into the authoritarianism we know today, all of that came from that moment. It almost didn't happen. The coup almost succeeded. And the man who stopped it did so by a margin of hours. Boris Yeltsin was arrested 48 hours too late. What if it had been 48 hours earlier? Let's open the vault. August 1991. The Soviet Union is 30 months into Gorbachev's twin reform programs, Glasnost, the political opening, and Perestroika, the economic restructuring. Neither is going well. The economy is contracting. Consumer goods are scarce. The Baltic republics have already declared independence and are being loosely ignored. Nationalism is rising in Ukraine, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. The Communist Party's hardliners, the generals, the KGB chiefs, the industrial ministers, have concluded that Gorbachev's reforms are not saving the Soviet state. They are killing it. On the night of August 18th, 8 men launch the coup. They surround Gorbachev's dacha in Crimea and place him under house arrest. They seize state media. They put tanks on the streets of Moscow. Their plan requires one thing they failed to execute in our timeline: they do not arrest Boris Yeltsin, the elected president of the Russian Republic, who is at his own dacha 40 kilometers outside Moscow. In our timeline, Yeltsin drives to Moscow, reaches the Russian parliament, the White House, and climbs onto a tank to deliver a speech that galvanizes the resistance. Hundreds of thousands of Muscovites surround the building. The military refuses to fire on civilians. The coup collapses in 60 hours. The margin was the drive to Moscow. The drive was possible because nobody arrested Yeltsin that night. In this timeline, the duty officer reviewing the arrest list includes Yeltsin. He is detained at 4 a.m. He never makes it to the White House. He never gives the speech. Without Yeltsin, the Russian parliament has no rallying point. The crowds that gathered in our timeline don't know where to go. The military's hesitation never crystallizes into refusal. The coup holds. By August 22nd, Gorbachev is still under house arrest in Crimea. The emergency committee is governing from Moscow. The Soviet Union is still alive. Subscribe to the Alternate Archive, a new timeline opens every week. The coup plotters are not trying to restore Stalinism. That is the crucial misunderstanding that most people bring to this scenario. By 1991, the hardliners around the emergency committee are not ideological communists in the 1930s mold. They are institutional conservatives, men whose power, identity, and livelihood is tied to the Soviet state as a structure. What they want is not the terror. What they want is the USSR to remain the USSR, a superpower, a nuclear state, a federation of republics under centralized control, with the Communist Party as the administrative architecture rather than a living ideology. They keep Gorbachev alive. This is not generosity, it is strategy. An imprisoned Gorbachev is a martyr. A detained Gorbachev who is eventually released and given a ceremonial role is evidence that the emergency committee is not the dictatorship the West fears. Within 6 weeks, they have stabilized the immediate crisis. The Baltic independence declarations are frozen by emergency law. Ukraine's referendum is postponed. The military has been publicly visible and has not fired on anyone. But the economy is still collapsing. Here is the historical trap the coup plotters have walked into. The Soviet economy was failing for structural reasons the KGB and the military could not fix. Centralized price setting, chronic underinvestment in consumer goods, an agricultural system that produced less than it should have on land that should have fed twice the population. These problems predate Gorbachev and postdate the Emergency Committee. The coup preserved the Soviet state. It did not solve the Soviet state's problems. What follows, over the next decade, is the most painful period in the alternate timeline, and also the most consequential. A government that cannot reform and cannot collapse, muddling through a transition it didn't choose, on a timetable set by events rather than decisions. The Emergency Committee faces a choice that will define the next 30 years. They can attempt a Chinese model, authoritarian political control combined with managed market liberalization. They have been watching China do exactly this since Deng Xiaoping's 1978 reforms. They know it works. Some of them have visited Shenzhen. They understand the basic mechanism. Or they can attempt to freeze the Soviet economy in amber, maintain central planning, suppress market forces, and hope that higher oil prices will buy them enough time to muddle through. This is the path of least institutional resistance. It is also the path to North Korea. The coup leaders choose something in between, which means they do both badly. Partial marketization without political liberalization produces corruption at a scale that would be familiar to anyone who watched Russia in the 1990s in our world, but slower, more distributed, less dramatic. There is no single privatization voucher program handing state assets to connected insiders overnight. Instead, there is a decade of incremental asset leakage, factory directors becoming their factories' effective owners, regional party officials accumulating land and commercial licenses, the nomenclatura converting political capital into economic capital one transaction at a time. The oligarchs still emerge. They just emerge more slowly, and they share the space with the state rather than capturing it. By 2000, the Soviet Union is still the Soviet Union in name. Its flag flies over Moscow. Its nuclear arsenal is intact, no loose warheads, no sales to rogue states, no period of post-Soviet nuclear insecurity that occupied Western intelligence services for a decade in our timeline. The Kremlin controls the weapons. That part, the coup managed. But the country that exists inside that flag is quietly, incrementally different from what it was in 1991. More market. Less plan. More nationalism. Less ideology. The Communist Party is still formally in power and genuinely irrelevant to anyone under 40. In our timeline, the Soviet collapse produced what Charles Krauthammer called the Unipolar moment, 15 years in which the United States was the sole global superpower with no peer competitor. That moment shaped everything: the Gulf War coalition, NATO expansion, the interventions in the Balkans, the confidence that produced the Iraq War. None of that moment exists here. The Gulf War still happens and still ends with Iraqi forces ejected from Kuwait. The US military is still overwhelmingly the world's most capable. But the diplomatic context of a surviving Soviet Union changes what the US can do unilaterally. Every major foreign policy decision from 1993 onward runs through the question, what does Moscow think? This is constraining. It is also, by certain measures, stabilizing. NATO does not expand eastward. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic remain in a grey zone, formally sovereign, not in any military alliance, economically integrated with Western Europe through EU association agreements but not members of the Western security architecture. This produces neither the security of NATO membership nor the anxiety of permanent exposure. Whether that is better or worse for those countries is genuinely contested. Ask a Polish security analyst from this timeline and an American one and you will get opposite answers. Both of them will be right. The one clear advantage: Vladimir Putin never rises to power. Putin's rise in our world was a product of specific post-Soviet conditions, the chaos of the 1990s, the weakness of democratic institutions, the oligarchs needing a protector, the FSB's institutional power in the vacuum. Remove those conditions and Putin remains exactly what he was in 1991, a moderately senior intelligence officer with no particular political future. The world in 2026 has two superpowers. Both of them are tired. The Soviet Union is a federation of 15 republics with genuine regional autonomy, a partially market economy, a nuclear arsenal that has never had a loose warhead, a life expectancy that never fell by 5 years as it did in our Russia during the 1990s, and a political system best described as competitive authoritarianism. Elections exist, multiple parties exist. But the Communist Party's institutional control of the security services and the energy sector means that the outcomes are managed rather than free. It is not a democracy. It is not North Korea. It is something in between that political scientists in this world have spent 30 years trying to name. The United States is wealthier than in our world in some ways and poorer in others. Without the Iraq War, which cost the US roughly $2 trillion and 4,500 military deaths, the federal debt is significantly lower. The political radicalization that followed that war's failure, which reshaped American politics throughout the 2010s, never happened in the same form. The specific pathway that led to the political polarization of our 2010s and 2020s is absent. America is not paradise. It still has its inequalities, its racial tensions, its economic anxieties. But it is a country whose foreign policy never included a catastrophic $2 trillion elective war, and the effects of that absence are visible in both the federal balance sheet and the national mood. The Cold War technically ended in 2008, when the Soviet Union, under its third post-coup leader, signed the Helsinki II Accords, formally ending the military standoff in Europe, demilitarizing the former Warsaw Pact zone, and establishing a new framework for nuclear arms reduction. Not with the bang of a wall coming down. With 30 years of exhausted negotiation. Technology in 2026 is roughly equivalent to ours. The Soviet computing tradition, which in our world was interrupted and its talent drained to Silicon Valley, continued developing under state direction. Soviet computers are different from Western ones, less elegant, more robust, built for reliability in harsh conditions rather than miniaturization. The Soviet Internet exists but is architecturally separate from the Western Internet, creating a genuine technological iron curtain in software even as the political one dissolved. The most consequential difference is climate change. The climate is marginally better. Not saved. But 15% better is measurable in coastlines, in agricultural yields, in the frequency of extreme weather events. In this world, the geopolitics of climate action were accidentally solved by a superpower competition, each side wanting to demonstrate that its economic model was more sustainable than the others. The Cold War's last victim turned out to be the atmosphere. In this timeline, it died before finishing the job. In our world, we celebrate the Soviet collapse as liberation. And for millions of people, in the Baltic states, in Poland, in Hungary, in Ukraine, it was exactly that. The end of occupation. The end of the specific terror of the Soviet security state. Real freedom arrived at real cost after real decades of waiting. But the collapse also brought things nobody chose: the 15 years of life expectancy lost by Russian men in the 1990s, the nuclear material that reached the black market, the frozen conflicts that unfroze in blood across the post-Soviet space, the specific pathology of post-Soviet governance that our timeline is still living through. The alternate world didn't escape history. It traded one set of costs for another. The people of the Baltic states didn't get their independence in 1991, they got it in stages, over decades, through negotiation rather than liberation. That is slower and duller and probably less satisfying as a story. it may also have produced more durable institutions. History doesn't deliver clean outcomes. It delivers trade-offs that the people living through them experience as necessity and only later, if ever, see as choices. Boris Yeltsin climbed onto a tank on August 19, 1991, and the empire fell. The fall freed millions and impoverished millions and created conditions for everything that followed. All of it, the good and the catastrophic, traces back to that specific man, on that specific tank, because he wasn't arrested for hours earlier. What does it tell us that the course of the late 20th century turned on a KGB duty officer's checklist? Tell me what you think in the comments. Until the vault opens again, subscribe to the Alternate Archive.